Before he retired, John Jappy worked in the General Accounting Division of the Civil Service and was involved in the preparation of national budgets. He has strong views about Scotland's finances.
If I was going to give a title, what I was going to say, it would be Hiding the Truth, because I've been a person that always wants to find the truth in everything, and that's just exactly what I've put my life to do, you know. So in 1968, just by chance, I happened to get in my possession the figures of how Scotland performed in taxation and money and so on. And I couldn't believe this. We always believed, and I believed it as a member of the establishment, that Scotland was a poor relation of the United Kingdom and couldn't survive without subsidies. You had the term subsidy junkie. But when I looked at these figures, just out of more interest, I said, this is untrue. Without Scotland's contribution, the UK would be considerably less well off. And this was 1968, before a drop of oil flowed. That's the important thing. So I said, oh, well, this will come out sooner or later. We'll see how long it'll take to come out, a few years perhaps. But no, it didn't. The Treasury and the establishment made sure that this did not come out until the first little chink in their armour came in 13th of January 1997, which is 29 years later. And it was due to Mr. Alex Salmond MP, who kept these probing questions. And on that particular date, he got a reply from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, William Waldegrove, a Tory, who pointed out to him that Scotland, since the Tories had come to power in 1979, this was 1997, Scotland had actually paid £27 billion more to the London Exchequer than it got back. And if you work that out statistically, it's 5,400 for every Scot. So there we were. It took all that time, and then a year later came another interesting development. Again, Mr. Salmond did a promoting, and he found from the library, in fact I've got the reference of it here, let me have a look at it. It was House of Commons Library, reference 98/8/56 EPRJT, that in the World's Wealth League, an independent Scotland will be 7th place in the World's Wealth League and the UK at 17th place. That was 1998. But the subsidy junkie thing was still around, as you probably know, and then when it was finally exploded, it came from a most unexpected source. It came nonetheless from a newspaper that by no friends of the SNP or independence, which was the Daily Mail. And on the 12th of October 2007, it published this report of how the monies in the Treasury had to be distributed to various areas according to the heads of population. So I've got this here. Northern Ireland, each person, £4,212. North East England, 3,133. Wales, 2,900. North East West England, 1,732. South West England, 978. West Midlands, 931. No Scotland. Scotland was more than paying its way. And who told us? In fact, the Daily Mail, and the heading is on that 12th October 2007, who are the real subsidy junkies? So the genie was out of the bottle, and I think that this was a breakthrough. From then on, we could in fact realise, it gave confidence to the campaign for independence that very much we could go our own way. And I'm convinced of that right through to this very day. Now, what I've done about publishing the truth is that I've created a blog. And this blog, I have now over 30 articles on the blog. I have over 1,000 now followers and close on 50,000 people visit, because I believe the reason is because I am telling the truth. And you can look this up for yourself. And as I say, I am more than confident that Scotland will become an independent nation when the truth is fully exposed. I would like to tell people the truth about Scotland's oil. There's so many lies being told about it. I would like to go at the beginning and explain how the whole situation has developed right through until today. Now, I was a civil servant in London when oil was discovered in the North Sea. I was not connected with it in any way with the work I was doing, but you could imagine the rumours that were going at the time. Britannia will rule the waves once more, or in Scotland. Scotland will be the richest nation in the world. I'm afraid this did not work out to be the case, because in a way I believed that the oil should stay in the North Sea where it was until the country developed its own technology to get it out. But there was a Labour government in charge at the time. Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, and the government, because of policies then, were deeply in debt. So the Labour Party said, we must get our hands on that money. And with that, we'll be able to pay off a debt of the nation's debts, and we'll be in charge, we'll be in power forevermore. That was the thought. Then there was the thoughts behind the scenes. What if the Scots find out the extent of the monies in the North Sea? They'll want a share of this, won't they? So what was planned, what they decided to do, was to hide from the Scots the amount of oil that was in the North Sea. Now, the Scots made estimates as to how much this oil would be, which were absolutely ridiculed at the time. But 30 years later, under the Macron report, when this came out and became public knowledge, they said the only thing about Scotland's estimate of the amount of oil that was in the North Sea, it was far too low. The next thing that happened with the Labour government, they had to get hold of this money quickly, as I mentioned earlier. So what did they do? They, rather than do what I suggested, that the country should in fact own the oil like Norway has, they leased it out to oil companies. And they gave it with the conditions of a lease, as I thought, were dreadfully poor. And all we got in return was pennies per barrel, instead of owning the oil, which surely should have happened. But despite that, the amount of oil in the North Sea meant that the amount of money that's gone into the Treasury is £300 billion, an unbelievable amount of money. Now, what's left? I'll go in a minute. I'll just have a wee look at this here. So we can actually think of 300 billion, a bonanza on top of all that we have already. How could you lose that money? It's gone. If the position at the moment is that the Chancellor has to borrow 114.8 billion, that's the exact amount he has to borrow for the current year 2014, simply to balance his books. Now, that money is never repaid. It's added to the national debt, which goes on up and up and up, and it is at the figure now is £1.43 trillion of national debt. Now, we have to pay interest on that. We can just about cope at the moment, but if interest rates were to rise, it wouldn't be another better together scare story if the term UK insolvency came right into the equation. So that's, you wonder, how did they get rid of that money, get rid of it, squander it? Well, foreign wars were one instance. And the UK actually spends 4 times more than any modern democracy in arms. It still pretends it can rule the waves. It pretends it's a world power. And when you look at the power of the Soviet Union and the power of China and the power of the United States, we are just a small island off the coast of Europe. And how we think that we can do that is just ridiculous. And that has accounted for a huge amount of our money being wasted. Then we had the policies of Lady Thatcher, who made the southeast corner of England the richest part of Europe. and big tax concessions were given to the already rich. And that money just drained away, while the north of England and Scotland saw unprecedented unemployment due to a deliberate policy. It was a very, very sad time that happened at that time. So I've mentioned what the Chancellor has to borrow and so on, but I'll mention something else. When the credit crunch broke, Britain, or the UK I should say, had the highest level of debt per person, per head of person, than any of the G20 nations. So, why weren't we in a similar position to Greece? There's no reason why we shouldn't be. We were the worst. The answer is that oil monies were pouring into the Treasury at a level of £60 a second at the time that the credit crunch broke, and allied to the fact that half the oil still remained in the North Sea. At 2008 prices, it was valued at £1.5 trillion that we, in a way, got off the hook. But that's not been resolved one little bit. We are a nation, as such, deeply in debt, and despite all the soundings that we're big future coming for us, we're in a very, very poor position as far as that's concerned. Other thing I would mention is what's made a big shouting match by the Better Together campaign was that in the last year, 2013, oil revenues dropped by 4.4 billion. Why? I'll explain that quite simply. Well, the oil companies are all geared up. They've got to develop new fields west of Shetland, and of course it's a wee bit more difficult to take the oil out from the North Sea, the half it remains. So they invested in new equipment and everything else, and they invested 14.4 billion, which was the biggest amount invested in the last 30 years. So the oil companies already up and go. But investing that money, they were allowed a certain amount of that against the tax they paid. So the oil revenues for that 1 year fell. Despite that, the position was if Scotland was independent, they would be in, I've got it written down here, they would be 14th wealthiest nation in the world, whereas the UK would be 18th. Now next year, you can write this down if you like, and you can check it when the OECD gives the revised figure. If oil revenues return to normal, Scotland will be back to the 8th position. If we're independent, we could be as high as 3rd, with the UK slipping back to 28th position in the world's wealth league. Now these are figures which I have myself calculated, and I reckon I am correct in what I'm saying now. So that is the situation, how important it is for Scotland to gain its independence. Interesting thing too, for the last 32 years it's officially recorded that taxpayers in Scotland pay more per head than those south of the border. That of course means that we can easily pay pensions and things far more easier than we can, than the rest of the UK can. So in many respects we are in a far better position. I've been looking at quotes made by politicians over a number of years, and what I find is that quite often is they make quotes, but once they've made them, they can't unquote them. So I've noted this down very carefully, what they've said, and I think it's worthwhile just listening to what they have had to say. First of all, I would just like to say that you see a politician, Danny Alexander, spouting forth figures, but really and truly, he's handed the script and he comes out with these figures. He's just a puppet, and his Tory masters pull the strings. He's had no life experience in producing these figures. He is, as I say, purely a puppet, and this goes for the bulk of the UK politicians that I've come across in my lifetime. So anyway, we'll move on to the various quotes made, recent years' quotes. We'll go back to 2007. David Cameron wrote in the Daily Telegraph, there was no point in trying to keep Scotland within the Union through fear of economic consequences. Now, where is the man's integrity? Because that's just what he's allowed to do, be bombarded with scare stories and lies to try to discredit what he in fact said himself in 2007. That sort of thing makes me sick as far as politicians are concerned. Then also in 2007 he came out with another statement which is very much the same. It would be wrong to suggest that Scotland could not be another successful independent nation. 2007. Then in 2008, it was in the House of Commons, this was Alistair Darling. He admitted that Scotland's oil revenues had been underwriting the UK's failure to balance its books for decades. That was the 29th of May 2008, and that was being recorded in Hansard. Now, jump a few years now to 2012. Alistair Darling said, "Now our case is not that Scotland cannot survive as an independent nation." Straightforward there. Then also in 2012, Lord Nigel Lawson, former Tory Chancellor, he entered the fray and said Scotland is perfectly capable of being an independent nation. There are many more independent countries in the world which have a lot less going for them. And that's pretty straightforward. Then in 2013, 10th of January, on Newsnight Scotland, this is worth remembering, this 10th of January 2013, Alistair Darling said, "If you have independence or separation, of course a currency union is logical." A year later, he said, "A currency union is dead in the water." This, of course, is just a scare story. Changed his mind, said the very opposite. Can you trust a man who is leading the Better Together campaign when he says the opposite in 12 months, which is a vital, important issue in the whole debate? Then finally, I think, among all the lies that's coming out in the scare stories, sometimes you get a glimmer of the truth, quite more than a glimmer. And on the 2nd of February 2014, this happened. It came from that pillar of the English establishment, the Financial Times, which says, "Immediately on becoming independent, all Scots will be 11% better off. This works out at £1,321 for every man, woman and child in Scotland, or £5,812 a year for the classic family 2.4 children." Financial Times, 2nd of February 2014. Now, I think that has exposed just how false politicians can be. And the truth is, as was obvious from these remarks, that Scotland is more than capable of standing in its own 2 feet.